like very basic questions. Images. Everyone loves photos. Do you like it better on the left or the right? How about the email contact form? How the user contacts the property. Is it better open or closed? Top nav. Is it easier to navigate through tabs or arrows? And then the basic kind of look and feel questions. So who did we ask this? Who did we ask about these things? We did not ask the stakeholders, and we did not ask the team. But we pretty much asked everyone else we could find. So we asked the renter support team. We asked the sales team. We took paper mocks around the water garden and asked random people at lunch what they thought. Because you know what? They're renters, right? Like they've probably rented an apartment at some point in their life. And we also brought in all of our friends and family, and we had sessions in the office, and we gave them $5 Starbucks gift cards. And let me tell you, like, it is amazing what people will do for a $5 Starbucks gift card. Pretty much like the best return on investment ever. And at the end of the day, we had consensus on most of these topics. Now, for those of you that are kind of aesthetically offended by crowdsourcing design, we were pretty confident that the questions we were asking would get us to a pretty cohesive page. And ultimately, we were right. So we felt pretty solid about this. We felt like we had a good basis for starting out with this page. So we went on to the next phase, kind of. So this would be the phase where you put together your primary use cases, you get some high fidelity mocks, you do the click-through pass through those use cases in a tool like Exure, or you can even build out an interface through Square UI now. There's some sample data in the browser. Only takes like a couple days. And you actually put this in front of users and have them click through. And it's a great way to find out pain points in the process, interaction designs, interaction behaviors. You can really get some great early learnings from this. And yeah, it'd been 8 years since we redesigned. We were a little excited. So we moved past this, and we went straight to build. So we built, and we built, and we built. It was kind of a long process. And we QA'd a lot. And then we got to the point where there were bugs. Don't get me wrong. There were still a lot of bugs. We were probably at about 80% complete. But we thought we want to get this out. We want to see how it's performing. We want to get users on it. So we released to about 5%. Now, that's what worked for us. If you're a huge company, you have tons and tons and millions and millions and millions of users, then you can go like 1% or 0.5%. If you're a smaller company, you might want to just release it and measure. But we looked at the results. And we're like hyper number obsessive. So we looked like 2 hours after we launched, and then we looked like 2 more hours after we launched, and then we showed like a lot of restraint and waited all the way until the next day. And we were down. We were like so far down, it like wasn't even funny. So we rolled back to 5%. And we were like, okay, like seriously? This is like a great looking page, right? And that is like really a not great looking page. So what was going on? And one of the metrics that was the most down was what we call check availability. That's, again, how renters, users email the property. And that's like one of our most important KPIs, right? So we QA'd. We looked at all the browser metrics. We pounded on all the browsers. We looked at all devices because it was responsive. And we found a lot of bugs, like a lot of bugs. So we fixed them, and we released again. So yeah, we were still down. So we QA'd again. And we were like, OK, well, there's a few bugs here, but we need to go deeper. So we looked at the error logs. And if you have Splunk, like this is super easy, right? Yeah, we didn't have Splunk. So we had massive error logs to go through. And this was a new site, right? So we may not have had the best error logging, and I think that's something that the panel also talked about earlier. So it took us a while to figure it out. But eventually we found that there was an inconsistent server error happening like 5% of the time. So we fixed it, and we rolled out again. So we were still down, but it was better. So instead of being like double-digit down for check availability, we were actually only like 6 or 7% down. We were pretty confident at this point that there were no bugs for this workflow. Like, there were bugs other places, definitely. But for what we were trying to measure here, we felt pretty good. And so we did a deep dive. Instead of just looking at the broad KPIs, we really looked at what were all the numbers that could be affecting this specific metric. And specifically, we said, OK, is it the user coming to the property detail page and clicking the button? Or is it when they open the form, they're like, oh my god, this is a crazy freaking form, I'm out of here, and jumping? And what we found was that when people came to the page and clicked the button, we were down 8 or 9%. Once they opened the form, though, we were actually up almost 10%. So if we could figure out why they weren't clicking the button in the first place, then we would actually be in really good shape. So we optimized. And we ran through a few different variations. We changed, the header text. We simplified, removed the text on the side, changed the button color, played with a few other things. And we found a winner. So can anyone guess what the main contributing factor was that pushed us up?
Same as gold. Yellow?
Yes. It is always the freaking button color. It is always the button. Every site I build from now on will have yellow buttons. And not only did we find a winner, but it actually had a 12% lift over legacy. So it was huge. It was like a huge difference. So we were pretty stoked on this. And as we optimized the other pain points that we were finding on the site, we were eventually able to roll out. But one caveat, and I think this is something that Chris, who's not here, talked about earlier on the panel as well, which is when you're optimizing specific areas of the site like this, you want to be very careful that you do not create a Frankensite. So we had this beautiful site, and here we were changing a random button to yellow. Not the thing you want to do. So we actually looked at the other instances of the buttons throughout the site, and some of them we actually did test and decide whether we wanted to make them yellow or not, or if we just felt comfortable going ahead and making the change. And we try and do that every time we change a style, whether it's font or buttons, tabs. We always try and come back and then look at the site and look at the page holistically and make sure that we're keeping everything as a cohesive experience. Because you can really optimize to one specific feature, and you will be winning there, but it can come at the detriment to other features on the site. So always be conscious. We actually try and go back every couple of months and make sure that we're keeping a consistent experience. So let's recap. Hopefully this makes a little bit more sense now. So you have an idea. Right from the very beginning, the design phase, you're going to test. You're going to do user testing. And you can either do this through, like we did, through paper mocks and people and friends and family, or you can use something like 5secondtest.com is great. Doing click tests is really easy, so that's a great tool for it. And if people aren't liking it, if they're not finding things that they're reacting to, then you need to go back and reassess. If they're good, go on to prototype phase. And again, in the prototype phase, focus groups, friends and family, usertesting.com is another tool we use a lot. And Same thing, pain points, reassess, retest. Everything's good, you can keep going to build. Once you're done building, release, and do release early. Like, it's okay if there are bugs, and it's okay if it's not totally polished yet. The goal is to start seeing directionally how things are looking so you can change it before you've put all that time into it. And analyze, 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 and just keep going. Iterate as much as you need to. Once KPIs are up, you want to make sure that you're going 50-50, and you're always iterating incrementally up and not just going straight to rollout. Because sometimes you can be surprised once you get more volume onto something. And don't be afraid of the deep dives, right? So the deep dives can tell you a lot of specifics about why something might be going wrong. And again, once you have that winner, do a 50-50 test against control. Make sure you're good to go before you take that final step. So, how do you make a data-driven feature release a reality at your company? So, it would have been awesome if this just happened overnight at rent.com, right? But our redesign process was almost a year to do the build, which is a really long time. Again, it had been 8 years. So there were a lot of people along the way as we were trying to roll out, because the rollout actually took 6 months. From the time we finished, got 80%, we started rolling it out. It took about 6 months before we were actually able to roll out 100%. And we had a lot of people that said, you know what? Just go back to legacy, make it the same as the old site. This isn't working. We're so far down. So we really had to do a lot of championing to make sure that we move forward, because the old site wasn't working, right? It's 8-year-old code. Google hates 8-year-old code. Our SEO was down. The site was not going to be sustainable. We couldn't iterate off of it. We had to move forward. So set expectations up front. Let everyone know this might take a while to roll out, but we're going to get there. And the best estimation that I can give you from our experience is that it might take about half the time it took to build. So if you have something that took a month to build, it might take 2 weeks to roll out. If it took 3 months to build, maybe you're looking at about 6 weeks. And I mean, that makes sense, right? Because the bigger the project and the bigger the feature, the more areas of the site it's going to be affecting and the more KPIs it's going to touch. So create a process. So how are you going to test? When will decisions be made? Are you going to look every couple of hours? Are you going to look once a day? Are you going to assess once a week? How are you going to go about that? And when will fixes and tweaks go out? So this is actually really important, especially for the engineering side, right? Because once you get out there, once you get the site out there and you start finding the bugs, you need to have a plan in place. Are you going to put all those bugs into a sprint and then roll out at the end of the sprint? Or are you going to roll them out as they happen? So rent.com, we wanted to kind of keep moving really quickly, right? We wanted to get the site out. And so we actually started to release like intraday. And we lovingly refer to it as continuous integration, even though it's really not quite. Yeah, but definitely create the process and have everyone on the same page with the plan. Have the tools in place. So we have 2 main tools that we use to do the testing for this. We use an internal kind of homegrown platform called, that we call our MBT framework, that we use to do the initial split at the visit level. And then we use Optimizely to optimize all the front-end tweaks and optimizations and do the A/B testing. And that works really well for us. Certainly a number of other tools that you can use. Involve the team. So don't be a product manager that's like sitting there in the dark, looking at numbers, crunching them, tearing your hair out, going, why is it not working? Involve the whole team. Talk to the QA. Talk to the engineers. Talk to the stakeholders. Talk to your mom. Like, get as many opinions as you can, because sometimes the problems are going to be obvious and sometimes they aren't. And the more people you involve, the sooner that you can get to the answer and move forward. And finally, just track everything. Know exactly what you need to track before you start. Make sure that it's tagged. Make sure that you've tested the tags, because inevitably, the first time you roll out, the numbers are going to be like crazy wild, and everyone's going to be flipping out, and you're going to be like, oh, look, that event actually wasn't firing. And it'll just be really simple and silly. So finally, relax. You'll make it happen. And these are my dogs. And once it's done, you can take a nice nap on the porch. So I talked a little faster than I thought I would. So do you guys have any questions? Yes, in the back.
Do you find it difficult to get engineering on board to change their iteration or release schedule to do the intraday releases?
So the question was, do we find it difficult to get engineering on board to do the intraday releases? Not at the time, because there was a huge momentum within the company to get the site out, and we really wanted to be proactive and keep moving. I think the push came later, when the expectation then became that we were just always going to do intraday releases. And so there's been some pushback at that point and trying to find the right balance. But that is partly why you want to kind of get consensus before you start and find out what's right for everyone involved. And, yes?
Yeah, so what are your guidelines for determining statistical relevancy when you're running all of these tests and not pulling that out too soon or deciding too early?
Sure. So the question is, what are the statistical guidelines for making the determinations during this process? So, I mean, if the numbers are really big, like they were in our case, it wasn't a hard decision. You know, it wasn't something that we really had to think about. We, for the main set of metrics that we were looking at, the initial set, based on the split, we were using our internal metrics, just pulling database queries, basically. So we felt pretty confident in those. And yeah, once we got to the front-end optimizations, they was still large enough that we didn't have to worry about it too much. And once you get into margin of error, if it's just a business decision, right? Like, we knew we had to move forward, so we were willing to take a little bit of risk, but we still, you know, wanted to be cautious and not have like a 5% delta. And in terms of like the numbers that we wanted to see, we had to have, you know, tens of thousands of people in both control and sample, you know, tens of thousands of people on the particular metric that we were looking at in order to make a decision for our early funnel metrics, for our later metrics, because we have kind of this crazy 3-month life cycle for our product, which is really hard to manage, but I won't get into that here. We just try and look at that directionally, which is tricky, but it's kind of the best we can do. Does that answer your question? Okay. In the back.
Can you talk about how you balance the new product features versus the rewrite feature sets?
How we balance the new product features versus the rewrite feature sets. So we're really aggressive in our kind of feature rollout. So we kind of do both simultaneously, and we work on multiple features at the same time. However, we generally try and, if a feature is not successful in its initial rollout, we'll continue to iterate on that until it is successful, and we'll hold off on the next feature we have planned kind of for that team or that roadmap line until it is successful.
So do you split the teams then and have one just work on the new site and then continue on with the feature sets?
We had stopped all development on the old site. We probably stopped, I would say during the rollout period, for that 6-month period, we stopped all development. And we were focused solely on the new site. And I mean, this was our level of commitment for getting the new site to work, as we were already starting feature development on the new site before we rolled it out 100%. So we maybe made a couple changes to the old site, but for the most part, we were really 100% focused. Now, this was by far the biggest project that we'd had at Rent.com. So for the smaller projects and features that we release, it's just a business decision, and it's kind of an ongoing, weighting and prioritization of features as to how we allocate resources to them. We actually assess prioritization and feature development on a weekly basis. There? Yes?
So, I'm kind of curious as to what your process is, the decision-making process, or what things are worth the cost of doing the testing. So the click here button,
Right.
Deal that you could go down to like a particular font in this particular area of the site. So how do you weigh that? What's your process?
So it depends on doesn't depend on the feature. So we test pretty much every new feature that we release. And in regards to what we decide to test for that feature is based entirely on what we're seeing in the metrics. So if we release a new feature to a percentage of the user base and all the metrics are up, we don't test anything about it at that time. We may come back and do optimization later, but we won't even have to worry about it. In this case, we knew that that specific area was the one that was really underperforming. And so we, probably ran through 30 or 40 different things that we could test. And we said, okay, well, here are the ones that we think will have the highest impact. Button color, always a good one to start with. I don't think we did a font check, but it's just a matter of saying, okay, here are all the things that we can check. Which are the ones we think will have the highest impact? Start with those and keep on going down the list until you get, the numbers up. More questions? Yes.
What are your favorite tools for data tracking and testing and analysis?
So what are the data tools we use for data tracking, testing, and analysis? So at the time that we did this test, we relied really heavily on our internal metrics. And then we also used Omniture, I think, for the kind of more web metrics. We've since switched to Google Analytics and another proprietary platform for web analytics. But we still rely really heavily on our kind of internal database metrics. Anything else? Yes?
So I guess going up to your 6-month break, how did you scope that kind of project? What was the challenge with that?
Sure. So, well, first of all, we didn't realize it was going to take 6 months to roll out because we didn't have this process in place before. If we had, we probably would have scoped things differently. But we broke down the site into 2 major areas. One was the API development, because there wasn't an API previously, because 8 years ago, people didn't necessarily build with an API. So that was one major track. And then the second was the front-end responsive track. And for API, we just split it out by major feature set, so by search, by property information, by registration, et cetera. And by front-end, we started, as I said, with our highest priority pages, so the property detail page, our search result page, and we just broke it down from there. And I will say, even though we didn't prototype ahead of building, as soon as we did get front-end pages built out that had a workflow associated with them, we did start running them through user test and finding pain points and optimizing as soon as we could. Did that answer your question? Cool. What were some of the challenges with the responsive design? So still challenges. So Design, obviously, you're basically designing for three or more platforms simultaneously. And then just keeping, I would say the ongoing challenge with it has been making sure that as we aggressively develop new features, that all the breakpoints continue to have a good experience. And in fact, I'll constantly kind of look at our our smartphone breakpoint and go, no, it's not optimized the way it should be. So you kind of constantly have to go back and make sure that you're checking all the breakpoints with every new feature release that you add. And of course, QA, right? Just like drastically increase the number of devices you have to QA on. Yes. You, back.
Two-part question. One, did you do load time testing in terms of how fast the page is loading? And two, with the responsive design, did you end up doing a hybrid of server-side detection and front-end code, or is it pure responsive?
So there were two questions there. Hopefully everyone heard them. But the first was, did we do load time analysis? The second was, did we do any browser detection, or was it fully responsive? So for the first question, we did some during the initial development, but that was one of the things that we had to optimize for during the rollout, the page load time, because it was larger, but it wasn't necessarily because of the responsive framework. Again, we had also changed the API, so things were loading differently. We added different types of ads. So all of those pieces were contributing to the load time, but always something to optimize for, absolutely. And for the second question, any type of browser detection, no, but only in regards to browser width, right? So with the responsive site, you're purely looking at the width of the browser, not any device detection. Yes?
Users don't always like change. Just look at any Facebook release, everyone's always very unhappy until they love it and are happy about the next change.
Yep.
So how do you go about looking at your metrics and thinking, well, this is rational, that's because they're looking good as well, or this is just because you are not used to it?
Right.
This is my first
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
And my second question is, do you have to make any changes in your architecture of the technology in order to be able to do those 5% allowance? Because there are some cases where it's not necessarily obvious to do so.
Okay, so the first question is users don't like change. How do you deal with that? And so the answer to that, and I didn't necessarily mention it here because it's something that is specific to our internal platform and how we segment traffic, which is that we have the ability, so we both drop a cookie, obviously, and then returning renters would get the old site. And if someone came to the site and didn't have a cookie, they were on a different device, but they log in, we sent them back to the old site. So we did try and segment between to account for that. So we were really trying just to test against new users. And then as we proceeded into the process, we incorporated returning users into that once we were further along. The second question was, I forgot already. Did we have to change anything for our technology? Not for this specific project, but we have since then. So again, if you have an internal framework to segment traffic, I'm not recommending that as an avenue, like unless you're actually building out a testing platform, because I'm a full believer in that you as a company should focus on the thing that you do best. But what we have found is that it is useful if we have something specific that we want to test, that we can alter the framework to enable us to do that test more effectively. So we did. We didn't for this test, but we have for other tests that we've run. Anyone else? No? Yes?
Going back to the check availability button.
Yep.
Let's say that two of the changes were like pretty equal in terms of reliability.
Yep.
You don't really have like statistical data to really choose. What are some of the thought process about like choosing like
Sure. All things being equal, then we'll go with the one that we like best. Or we can, again, send it out to users and see what they like. We have had instances where we have pretty equal results, more around like homepage imagery and stuff like that. And sometimes we'll just build out a homepage with both, and we'll just continue running 2 different types for a while until we just pick one that we like better. So yeah, at the end of the day, you'll usually see some difference, but if you don't, then it won't matter anyway, right? Anything else? Yes?
So you talked about initially your design having a 5% decrease in click-through and check availability, and then a 12% increase in the second column page,
yep.
which could speak to the quality of individuals going through that second page. So how did that second page roll that back to you? Went up 12%.
It still had a higher level of submission than the old site, than the old form did. So that remained, which is why we saw such why we saw such a big lift ultimately when we figured out the first issue. So yeah, so the form was solid. Yes?
If after the redesign the metrics stayed relatively neutral, do you think the business interests would have viewed that as a failure of the relaunch, or how do you think you would have?
So I will say that even though we had a big win on the check availability form, overall, metrics were like our end kind of revenue tied KPI, which I'm not going to talk about here because it's way too complicated, did end up being neutral, but it allowed us to iterate the next 40 projects or features that we had, and we really would not have been able to do that against the old site. So it was still, a win from the business perspective. And that kind of comes back to, every feature counting and every one being a step towards a bigger vision or goal, right? Anything else? No? Cool. Great questions, guys. Thanks so much.